Did you follow that? I'm not sure I did. Hi, I'm Bill Yosses. You might remember me from Presidential Eats. I'm going to show you how to make pie art. I'm going to show you how to make 3 pies: blueberry, peach, and plum. And more importantly, I'm going to show you how to decorate those pies with increasing difficulty. The challenge gets harder as we move along. We use geometry, we use cutouts, and we use a basic string art system for how we're going to decorate these pies. The history of pies goes back to the Egyptians. There are like hieroglyphics about bread making in which they introduced sweet fruits into their bread, basically the first pies. And that goes all the way through history, especially in England during the Renaissance, when pie making became just outlandish with all kinds of layers of different interests. This is where 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie comes from, where they would actually bake the pie, not the birds, and then they would insert these birds into this enormous pie, and when it was cut open, the birds fly out to the surprise of everyone in the court. No live birds will be harmed in this lesson today, but we are going to show you how to make really extraordinary, outrageous designs that will impress your friends. Last time we met, I showed you President Obama's favorite apple pie. I'm going to be making one of Barack Obama's favorite desserts, American apple pie. And we went through the basics of pie making. So we'll review that shortly, but we're going to introduce something brand new this time, and that is natural coloring and flavoring. And the way we do this is by dehydrated fruit powders. In this case, it's a mango fruit powder. We also can use others such as dragon fruit powder, beetroot powder, matcha green tea. A really special one is butterfly pea powder, the blue powder that we're going to use for the blueberry pie. So remember our basic pie crust: flour, very cold butter, salt, very important, and water, just enough to bring that pie dough together. Now we're adding something special this time, and that's the fruit powder. We first add flour and butter, let it run in the machine for a few minutes until the butter breaks into small pea-sized pieces. If they don't get small enough, we'll break it up with our hands. And so now here's the special part. This is the mango fruit powder. We're going to add it now before the pie dough has completely come together, because we don't want to overwork the dough and make too much gluten. Okay, so as you can see, these butter chunks are still like pea-sized throughout the dough, and that's what's going to make for a flaky dough as they expand in the heat in the oven. The next step is to complete it by hand. By mixing it by hand, we don't have the power of the machine, which is overworking the gluten. Now we're going to wrap this in plastic wrap and put it in the refrigerator for a couple hours so it sets up nicely. It's been a few hours. Here is some of our mango dough. I've already rolled it out, and I'm going to show you how to cut the strips. To do that, you'll need a dry pastry brush, you'll need a straight edge, and a pizza cutter. So by using the straight edge, first of all, I cut a nice clean line, and then I move it by just kind of eyeballing the distance each time. It doesn't have to be exact, but you do want it as close as possible. You may remember when I showed you Obama's favorite pie that we pre-bake the bottom crust. So we line this with foil, bake it at 350 for about 20 to 30 minutes, starting to get a nice golden brown. That way it's going to complete its baking when we put the top on and continue to bake. So for our mango design, we're going to use a peach filling, which is peaches, sugar, cornstarch, and lemon juice. That's our filling. We put it in the pre-baked pie crust, and then we're going to start to add our strips. This is a pastry mold, something that you might do a mousse in. You can use either oval or a circle. It helps us keep our design in place. One of the tips for making this kind of pie is to keep the pie dough very cold. It's in the fridge now. I'm going to bring it out. So I've made the strips for our design, and I'm going to start placing them on the pie. This first decoration that we're going to start with is with the mango powdered pie dough. And it's the one that's the most subtle, so it's the closest to like a natural pie dough. And our system here is that we take the strip, and the first one, you just pull across and lay like this, completely crosswise, perpendicular to the pie. The next one, and the succeeding ones, you take like this, and you pull it just a little bit in this direction, each one going a little bit farther. I'm going to keep doing this design until I go all the way around the pie. So as you can see, as we keep going, we started out just straight across, but now each time we add a strip, it curves farther and farther. This design was developed by a friend of mine, Lauren Coe, who was a guest judge on my new show, Baker's Dozen, showing on Hulu. So this design was inspired by string art, but you could see all different kinds of other designs on her Instagram. This kind of pie decoration is seeing a resurgence right now, but it's a tradition that has been around for centuries. So the ring is holding all of our dough in place. At this point, we want to cut off the edge, the extra excess. I mean, I suppose if you wanted a crazy pie, you could leave it on, but this looks a little bit cleaner. It looks more complicated than it is. Once you start with that first strip, just keep following it around. Next, we put an egg wash on this, and it's ready to bake. So here's a tip. I like to add a little salt to the water. Then when I mix it with the egg doesn't become so clumpy. It sort of breaks up the protein so it becomes nice and smooth like paint. Then we're going to brush this on and add a little bit of granulated sugar before we bake it. We're going to make a plum pie, but we're going to color the pie dough with natural vegetable and fruit powders. Beetroot powder and this very specially colored dragon fruit powder. It's going to be really gorgeous and a deep red burgundy color. I just showed you how to make the simple geometric technique with the strips, but we're going to build on that now to make a braided exterior and a starburst in the center. It's not as hard as you think, and it's going to impress your friends and family. So we're going to use our standard ingredients to make this pie dough, but this time the color is going to come out much more vibrant with these new red and pink colors. Like before, we start out with our flour and butter, then we're going to add our salt and our colors, mix that in, but we don't want to overmix it and just let it come together as quickly as possible. This is the fun part, getting your hands dirty. So we're breaking up the butter a little bit. Remember, we're looking for smaller pieces. And then we're going to add the water and bring it all together. And now I'm going to knead the dough to finish incorporating the dry spots. So next we want to shape this dough, bring any dry pieces into the center, and then we're going to push it down so it's nice and flat. It makes it easier to roll out later. Now we're going to make our fruit filling. Today we're using wonderful fresh plums. We've added the sugar already so it pulls the juices out of them. And now we're going to put them into the pot and cook them down. Once they come to a boil, that's when we add our cornstarch in a slurry, which means cold water and cornstarch, 3 tablespoons cornstarch to a half a cup of water. And that is going to cook our fruit and also thicken the juices so that they don't bleed out into the pie dough that we have pre-baked. Once we bring the fruit mixture to a boil, we're going to pour it into a long sheet pan and put it in the refrigerator to cool. That way, when we put it into our pie shell, it won't bleed. I've showed you how to do the strips using the pizza wheel. Now I'm going to show you how to braid. So you take your strip and pinch it together instead of a strip to form a cord, and then gently roll it on a flat counter. Be careful, don't pull your hands this way or it'll pull apart. Again, this is the next step in complexity because it's a little bit harder than the last one. You're making a cord, so you want to squeeze it pretty tight. You don't want any air pockets. You're just rolling. You're not pulling it back and forth. Just keep rolling and you'll let that cord form by itself. For the braid decoration on the outer perimeter of the crust, I'm going to show you a 2-strand braid. So as we start at one end, and the idea is don't hold them off the counter for too long. You want to move quickly and form your braid. And you can tighten it as you go along by, once you have the braid, watch. See how it's tightening as we go? So in opposite directions, twist, place it, one next to the other. And it's always good to make some extra braids, because when you're adding them to the edge of the pie, they might break, and the circumference is always longer than you think it is. Remember, pi r squared? A little geometric humor. Here we have our pre-baked pie crust. We're going to put our filling in here. So in preparing to make these pies, I started to do some research, and I found that the whole history of pies goes back very, very early. So there are hieroglyphics and drawings in the Egyptian pyramids where they're making bread and they're putting fruits, dried fruits, in the bread, folding it over and baking them. So that to me seems like the very first pie. This is a starburst pattern, or some people might call it a bicycle spoke pattern. So we need some very thin strips. So we have the strips that we cut already, but now let's go through and make them even thinner. Then we measure to the center of our pie, just hand measure, eyeball it, with one of our strips. So that goes right to the center. But then in order to get this starburst pattern, we want then the next piece is going to be a little shorter, and after that a little shorter yet. And it's important that they be set around the entire pie at equidistance, each one from the other. So we want to wind up with 36 individual spokes of different sizes. So we'll cut 12 pieces of each size. Here's a good tip. Decide how many spokes you want, and hopefully it's a number divided by 4. Here's the reason. We're going to think of our pie as a clock, so 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 and 9. And we'll start out, if we have 12 pieces, then you know that you want 3 between 9 and 6, 3 between 6 and 3, 3 between 3 and 12. So you see, it's much easier now that we have this frame put together. Now I can divide it into 3 by just eyeing it. So we're going to fill this all the way up. From the same dough that we made the braids from, we're going to cut some leaves to decorate the center. So you can use any cookie cutter, or you can actually cut it out by hand. That's perfectly all right. And you're going to set it into the middle of your pie, overlapping a little bit. Now that we have our spokes, we're going to add the beautiful red braid around the outside edge. And in order to make that stick, we have our glue, which is our egg wash. In order to figure out how to add our braid, we need to know the circumference. I'm sure you remember from your geometry class that circumference equals 2 pi r. R being the radius, which is 4.5 times 2, 9, times pi, which is about 3, we know that, let's not get crazy. 27 inches. Divided by 3 is 9 inches for each braid. Did you follow that? I'm not sure I did. The reason we make extra lengths of everything is as the dough sits, it can dry out a little bit and it can break in unexpected places. That's no fun. So we said 9 inches, but always here again, we'll give a little bit of extra room so that we're not limiting ourselves. Next step is we're going to add our braids. When you're decorating a cake or a pie, there's always a few seams. Like here you have seams between the 2 braids. Well, you can think of different ways. Here we used leaves, but you can also roll some pie dough and dip it in a little egg wash and make it look like you planned for that seam. So you'll notice that the braids are up kind of high in terms of the rest of the pie. So in order to prevent burning from that edge, we're not going to add any egg wash to that. It already has the red color, so I think that'll be enough. We are going to, however, egg wash our spokes because they get that nice golden brown color when they're egg washed. We're going to finish the whole thing off with some granulated sugar. So now that you've learned all these special techniques, we're going to put them all together, and I'm going to show you how to create an intricate sculptural pie crust. For this pie, we're going to make a blue pie dough for our blueberry pie. And we do that using butterfly pea flour powder. And it has almost no flavor really, but it's great for the color. So while our blue pie crust is cooling, we're going to cut some strips, but with various widths so that we have some variation in our final presentation. So the idea here is that we're going to blend together different colors, some blue, some white, some of the other colors, so that we have a finished, beautiful pie crust. So here's our blueberry filling. We cooked it the same way as we always do, which means cooking the fruit with the sugar to pull the juices out of the fruit. Then we add our cornstarch slurry, mix that in, bring it to a boil, and that's what gives it its nice juicy texture. So that way it holds together when you cut through the pie. Here's a tip. So flatten out your fruit filling so that when you build your decoration on the top, it remains level. One of the most classic decorations on a pie is lattice. And we're going to show you how to do that today. As always, we start with an egg wash. So we added a little salt into this egg. So that's why it looks the way it does. It kind of has a brownish look, but that's because the egg is fresh. So the trick here, again, is that all of your dough has to remain cold. But even more important this time, because you're going to be setting your lattice down and sort of flipping it back. I'll show you what I mean. So here's the first one. It can stay there, and then maybe another one next to it. But this one, we're going to pull it back so that we can put a thin layer here. But this one can go all the way. But the next one should be folded back. This one, and then one folded back. Now we can lay this one down and this one over. Can go under here and try to get them as parallel and equidistant as possible. When it comes to this pie art stuff, uniformity is very important. You're essentially making a weave. So we've done our lattice with our white and blue dough, a few stripes over here as an accent, but this is going to be the background for the real decoration, which is a flower arrangement. So before we get started on that, pies have become a big part of my life. A few years ago, someone came to me and said, "Oh, well, you make pies. Would you make a pie for our Broadway show?" I said, "Sure, I'd love to." So what it turns out is that the Broadway show was Sweeney Todd. If you know the story, it's not exactly every baker's dream to be known as the person who made pies for Sweeney Todd. But they were such charming people, and I'm just a sucker for an English accent. Stephen Sondheim himself was involved in this production. So I was glad I did it. We made over 10,000 pies for this production of Sweeney Todd, like a typical chicken pot pie. And it was served in a pie shop. So the set, or stage, was an actual pie shop, imitating one that was in London. And the guests, the audience, came in, sat down at the pie shop and had their pie and mash. And then the musical took place around them. It was an absolutely magical experience. And so for special occasions, for anniversaries or for certain special dates, we would actually draw the actor onto the top of the pie. So we carved that in with a paring knife, and then we would also use some cocoa powder or some marzipan to fill in like eyebrows and lips, and we got pretty crazy with it. So we developed sort of like these pies that we were talking about all along, highly decorative and highly detailed. So just like I freehanded drew the faces of the actors who are on stage, I'm also going to freehand draw and use some cookie cutouts to make the flower arrangement on this pie. We have our lattice work background, but now we're going to make a flower arrangement out of these different colored pie doughs. So we're going to start with cutting a circle. This will be our flower vase, as if it's a spherical vase, and then we're going to cut a half moon out of it. And here again, we're going to use a little bit of our special egg wash. So at this point, we have our flower pot. Then I'm going to use the strips of red for the stems. We'll use the green, which is made with matcha Japanese tea, for the leaves, and we'll use blue and white for the flowers. So you want to place the leaves in sort of a random sequence, the way they look most natural. Don't be afraid to layer up, tuck edges in, and it's not an exact science, so you can make it complex, just keep building up your scene, and it comes out wonderfully. A little bit different once it's baked than you see the raw dough, but that's the surprise of it. And the other thing that looks nice is if you score the flower pot with a paring knife to give it sort of some texture and contour. So now we're going to add the egg wash and some granulated sugar, but only to the uncolored doughs. That really brings out, makes them a little more golden brown, but in the colored doughs it can make them too dark. Once you have the decoration finished, you bake the entire pie at 350 degrees for between 35 and 40 minutes. But keep an eye on it because it's sort of a balance between the fully baked product and how it's going to look. I had so much fun showing you all these different pie techniques, and I hope you'll try them at home. Be sure to check out my show, Baker's Dozen, with Tamara Mowry Housley on Hulu. See you later, Delish. It really does smell good.